What up, fam? Welcome to Skill Tree, where we learn how to do just about everything. So last week I put up a poll on my community page asking all of you what kind of project you'd like to see next. The winner of that little contest by a landslide was making like a leather journal cover. And I'm not gonna lie, it's kind of the one that I secretly wanted you to choose. In my head it was a toss up between that and like a magic wand, because I have kind of a really cool idea for the magic wand, but I am stoked that you chose this one. Now, since we've already leveled up quite a bit in leathercraft, there's gonna be some of the more basic things that I'm just gonna kind of touch on during this video. So if you're new to leatherworking, check out some of the videos in this playlist. They just go over some of the more basic skills that we've already covered in more detail. Okay, so as I was saying, the votes came in and the leather journal cover won. But then, fair viewer, the maniacs over in the Discord community dropped an idea in my head. They said I shouldn't just make a journal cover, but a book cover for a very specific book. The 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons Player's Handbook. And with that, lightning struck my brain. So here's what's gonna happen. Over an extended period of time, I'm going to make 12, count them, 12 different book covers. One for each of the classes in D&D. So moving in their order of appearance in the book, aka alphabetical order, our first stop is the Barbarian. Fueled by unbridled, mindless fury, the Barbarian is the tank warrior that just wades into the enemy and makes them drown in pools of their own blood. So with that scene set and that vision in our mind, I present to you the Tome of the Barbarian. Hot damn, I love how this thing came out. To learn how I made it cool the fires of your rage just long enough for us to level up this skill. Making the template. So first and foremost, we need to come up with a template for our cover. I started by laying the book down on a large sheet of paper and marking off its perimeter. Then I cleaned up my lines with a square. Now these lines aren't the ones that are going to be cut out, they're just what we're going to measure the rest of our template against. To keep this clear, I inked them in as a dotted line. Now I wanted the reveal, or the little bit that hangs over the book, to be 3/8 of an inch all the way around. So I measured and marked the extra 3/8 of an inch all the way around my dotted line. And this was a mistake. You see these little indents at either side of the spine of the book? When you open it up, the cover bends at those folds, and the spine compresses a little bit. Then it all spreads back out when you close the book. Meaning my measurement from edge to center is actually smaller when it's open than it is when it's closed. This left me with absolutely no overhang. So I ended up having to add another 3/8 of an inch on top of what I already added, making it a total of 3/4 of an inch on either side from my dotted line. Now these inside flaps that the covers actually slide into are only 3-inch wide pieces of leather. So I drew them onto my template as well. Then I carefully cut the whole thing out. Now I actually ended up making 2 of those templates. One of them for the main body of the cover that actually wraps around the book, and the other one so I could make a template for this whole strap wrapping piece. On that second template, I measured out and marked where the spine of the book would fall. I wanted to set those boundaries in place so I knew where the center of the faces of the book would be, rather than the center in relation to the spine of the book. So if I found center from like here to here, then everything would have actually been over just a touch. To find these centers, I simply folded the template in half lengthwise. Then I folded each side over to the marks I made for the spine. Now where the 2 folds meet are the center of those spaces. Using that center mark, I drew in my circle with a compass. Then I marked in all of the cross sections at a thickness of 1 inch, again using the folds as my center guide. Finally, I drew in the center of my circle a 1/2 inch in from its outer edge. Happy with that, I cut the whole thing out and tested its fit over the book. Alright, sweet, so at this point we have a solid plan and a roadmap to get us there. So with all that in place, it's time for cutting and tooling. Alright, so now it's time to bust out our leather and make the magic happen. For this project, I'm using a piece of beautiful 4-ounce vegetable tan leather. I began by marking out the leather with my template and using my square to keep the lines nice and straight. Then I tested the fit before going any further. Next, I marked off my wrapping design and carefully cut it out as well. Quick note here, while cutting this bit out, I decided to leave all these strap pieces extra long. This way, once they're all locked in place, we can trim them and have them exactly the right size. Also, make sure you have a plan in place for your closure design and leave enough for that as well. So with those all freed from the leather, I positioned the wrapping as centered as possible and marked off the inner circle. Then I cut it out, making this little portal to look through. Also, don't forget to cut those 3-inch flaps that hold the cover in place. So the idea of having this kind of hole in the middle and seeing the art was completely by accident. Originally, I was gonna have this axe design in the middle and just do different textures and rivets in here. But once I laid the template on the book to see how it fits and saw that it framed this scene perfectly, I just I couldn't not do it. One of those random moments of inspiration, and I love how that looks. Now to get these designs, I simply pulled them up on my phone and laid a piece of plexiglass over it. Then I used a bit of tracing paper to copy the D&D logo. I also decided to use this Barbarian axe logo after discussing it on the Discord. Special thanks to Middle Miss Red for some of the layout ideas. So with that design in hand, I wet down the leather to make it pliable, then traced my images with a stylus to transfer them onto the piece. Once all marked in, I went back over my lines with the swivel knife and cut them into place. Then I used my bevel tool to compress the material around the design and make them pop from the background. Now to define these edges, I busted out the old wing divider and ran it along the outside perimeter at a 1/2 inch from the edge. Now understand something, I'm busting out a lot of tools here like a wing divider and a swivel knife. You don't need all that if you're just getting started. You could use a ruler to mark those edges. And you can use like an X-Acto knife or a little razor knife to cut in your lines. So just saying, don't feel like you're watching this and like, I don't have any of the tools. There's a really low barrier to getting started with this stuff. I cut that edge line in as well, and again used my beveler to add some depth. I also cut in this tiny D&D dragon. It's in the exact same spot that they're featured on the actual books. That was another Middle Miss Red idea. Again, very cool detail. Thank you for the idea. Now for this texture, I actually used a border stamp that I picked up at Tandy's. As its name states, it's usually used to make like a border to something. I just like the look of it when you kind of stack it on itself like that. It almost has kind of a chainmail-y look. I don't think it's commonly what it's used for, and it's not perfect, but I like that about this. This is a barbarian's book, so just that big, mean texture is kind of cool. I think it looks cool. So now with the main body all tooled up, I use the same method to make a border around the outsides of my wrapping. Then I slick the edges on both pieces to ensure a clean, professional appearance. Now with all that looking all tooled and sexy, we're almost at the point where we can put it all together. But before we do that, let's drop some color into this biatch and move on to dyeing. So the two main colors I'm using for this bad boy is an ox blood for the red here and a mahogany for the trim and the wrapping. I began by carefully brushing in the mahogany all around the border. Then I went back in with a rag and filled out the remaining spaces as evenly as possible. Finally moving on to dyeing the wrap and those inner flaps. I also decided to dye the ampersand dragon and the handle of my axe. Alright, so I've had a lot of prodding about this from a lot of you skill monkeys, and I finally broke down and decided to get myself an airbrush setup. And may I just say, you were right. This bad boy laid down my oxblood stain buttery smooth and super even. It got into every little crevice perfectly. And once that oxblood was in place, I faded in some of the mahogany from around the edges to give the whole thing this kind of vignette effect, which I would not have been able to do by hand. Long story short, I love my new toy. Speaking of love, for my axe blade and the dragon fire down here, I use my favorite product, Rub and Buff. This stuff goes on easy and can be buffed to a beautiful metallic shine. If any of y'all saw my custom Witcher medallion video, link to it up here, you'll know how much I love this product. Honestly, if you haven't yet, I highly recommend you pick it up. It's really cool. Now at this point in the project, I personally moved on to adding in all of this hardware. It wasn't until later that I remembered that I wanted to add an antiquing to the whole cover. And so you don't make the same mistake, I'm gonna kinda tuck that right here in this episode. So again, using my new favorite tool, I sprayed on a layer of Pro Resist. This will just keep the antique finish that I use from muddying up all the other colors I've already laid down. And just so you know, the finish that I'm using is the Fiebing's Mahogany Antique Finish. So once my resist is dry, I rub in the antique paste and immediately rub it back off. The antique stays in all of the deeper tool marks, adding just a little extra contrast. So with that little addendum completed, we can finally move on to putting it all together. Now because this is the Tome of the Barbarian, I want it to look a little bit dangerous. And let's be honest, the Barbarian's more likely to beat you to death with the damn thing than they are to read it. To that end, I found these gorgeous pyramidal rivets. Quick note on these though, make sure if you order them, you also get this special anvil, without which it's gonna be really hard to set them in place. So to put these in place, just punch the hole where you want it, drop in the rivet, and set it into its custom anvil. Now add your rivet cap to the other side, and set in place with your striker. So tiny details like that are so simple to put on, and they add this unforeseen level of badassery to your project. I mean, look at, they're like sharp spikes. All the other books in your library cower in fear. And continuing with that leather and steel theme, I punched holes all along the wrapping to accommodate these little metal spots. Now these things work just like staples. Just drop them into the holes you punched and bend the little legs over to lock them into place. Now it was at this point, and kind of because I like to add work to my plate, I guess, that I decided that I wanted to add stitching to the whole thing. Originally, I wanted it to kind of look clean, and I was going to use barge cement to glue everything in place. So doing the stitching made this thing exponentially longer to put together, but made it look so much better. So to line up my stitches, I cut a groove all around the edge with my aptly named groover tool. Then I dropped in some dye just to blend that back in. Next, I applied a few dabs of barge cement to the corners and edges of the back side of the cover and those 3-inch flaps. After 15 minutes, I set them together, bonding them into position. Now I'm just doing this to set these flaps in place so they don't move while I hammer in the thread holes with my 4-prong punch. I continue set holes within my groove line all the way around the edge of the cover. Now the stitch I'm using for the entirety of this project is the saddle stitch. It's done with 2 needles on either end of a length of thread. Start by sending 1 needle through the piece in the first hole on one of the 3-inch flaps. Then pull it through evenly. Now send the right hand needle through the next hole in line and rotate it around to widen the hole a bit. Then send the left hand needle through that same hole from the other direction. Now feed both of them through and pull the stitch snug. And just repeat that all the way around. Just be careful not to pull too snug, as this can cause the leather to ripple along the edge. Now you're gonna need a lot of thread to go all the way around, and it's gonna kind of drive you nuts if you have this really long and you're trying to pull it all the way through the holes. To help you with that, just take that extra length and feed it further through the eye of the needle. Then just leave it folded in half. Now the length you're working with is much shorter, and as you need it, you just feed that length back out. That was one of those little tips that Chuck from Weaver at Leathercraft had mentioned in one of his videos, and it was super helpful. If you're into leathercraft, make sure you're checking that out. That man is a professional, and the videos are all really clear. When you reach the end, feed the right hand needle through the front, but not through the hole in the flap. Instead, fish it behind that piece, and tie it off with the other tail in a normal square knot. Then cut off the excess. At this point, it's already looking slick. So now it's time to apply the wrappings. This is done in exactly the same way. Starting with the front, I dab on some of the barge cement and lock the wrap into position. Then I simply punch my holes all along the edges and use the same saddle stitch to make the final connections. This is also when I trim off any excess leather. From here, I turn it over and repeat the whole process, sticking it, making the holes, and sewing. Now you're a thinker, so you may be wondering, now Clever, why didn't you just stitch it all the way across? So remember earlier how we talked about that when you open the book, the spine compresses, and when you close it, it stretches back out? By sticking the pieces onto the book while it's closed and stopping the stitches before the spine, I leave enough room for this little space here to be able to happen. This way the leather won't be tight and fight me when I close the book, and it also won't get all creased up and crack over time when I open the book up. You'll also notice I stopped the thread early here too. This was done to lock in this little keeper piece that I threw together. By sliding it in place and sewing up the remainder, I set it in place and gave myself a way to keep the book shut with this extra strap I left in place. And check this thing out! You can't tell me this doesn't look slick. And this opening here, I'm really happy with how that came out. Not only that, the cool thing is I tried it on a bunch of the other books and it all works the same. It seems the artist positioned everything so a lot of the action is happening right here in the center. I gotta stretch before I pat myself in the back for that one, but that's really cool. And the cover, at least to me, has that barbarian vibe to it. You know, we got the weapons, we've got little spikes on the thing and that bloody red. It mirrors the rage in my heart. And the rub and buff has a really nice shine. It's just a little bit more dull than if I did like a silver leaf, which is great because I think that would overpower the rest of it if that was really super like glossy, shiny, and everything else had this kind of dull finish to it. Now again, special thanks to Middle Red for some of the design stuff, and also to Vortex over on Discord. I feel like lately there's been like at least one of you on the Discord that I turn to that I know specifically has done a project like this where I'm like, what do I do? And y'all are my heroes, and you bear with me, and you help me figure stuff out, and I really appreciate it. And if you want to help out like that, maybe be a resource for these videos too, or if you just want to hang out with amazing people doing amazing things, you really should join the Discord. Link down in the description. Also, keep your eyes peeled on the community tab. I'm going to post more of those polls so you guys can decide what kind of things I cover next. Now, if you like this project or at least like my video, why don't you hit me with that thumbs up love, and don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell icon so you know when I release new content. Also, if you have any ideas for skills you want to see covered, leave them down in the comment section and I will add them to the list. Alright, well I should get going. We're invading a dungeon tonight and I'm going to use one of these to vanquish my foes. In the meantime, keep leveling up, you.